What's up, MetaNerds? This video will pull from all material from Kanan and Legends to do a complete breakdown of one of the greatest vehicles ever produced in the galaxy far, far away. This is one of the first vehicles to enter production with the purchase of a clone army by its mysterious benefactors, with the Kaminoans using the prestigious and ancient shipwright Kuat drive yards to provide all the ships and vehicles. Kuat had been a staple of the Old Republic thousands of years earlier, and with the roughly 10 centuries between the destruction of the Sith and dissolving of the Republic military via the Ruusan reformations, the shipwright was eager to earn the kind of credits you only see during a galaxy-spanning war. Kuat had many subsidiary companies that each had their own specializations, and Rothana Heavy Engineering would be charged with crafting most of the land vehicles, like the AT-AT, SPHA, but also the LAAT and Acclimator, which is the first look at what we'll see were countless brilliant decisions that start all the way at the top with good leadership and project management, not as exciting as weapon engineering, but crucial to making sure that this army would work at such a large scale. By having Rothana build the Acclimator, LAAT, and AT-AT, all these designers could work with each other, planning around each other's needs, and had shared supply lines. With the Acclimator having its power systems and crew right down the middle, this main area on the sides are dedicated to the racks and conveyor belt systems full of gunships, and had the tanks packing the nose and lining the perimeter, produced as units to make sure that each Acclimator that left Rothana was fully loaded. And there was a seamless transition, having that insanely fast 0.5 hyperdrive, scrambling across the galaxy, rapidly deploying LAAT infantry and LAAT carrier variants, with the spacefaring and decently fast gunship having enough power to be a flying tank on its own, escorting the LAAT-C with its AT-AT, dropping it off in a matter of seconds with a quick release of the rounded mount on the middle legs, and it hit the ground running. Also keep in mind this holy vehicle trinity were each the main troop transports, with the Acclimator carrying 1,600 troops, more than twice the Venator, and the LAAT and AT-AT being the respective air and ground ways to move clones around the battlefront. And to go one step further, they could even pack in 2 AT-RTs for scouting ahead or setting up ambushes. The official mission directive for this Republic Walker was to act as a multi-purpose assault vehicle, capable of carrying out everything from the movement of clone platoons across any terrain, even when under heavy enemy fire, and also have the firepower to destroy the enemy's position once it arrived. The shape of the Walker is based on the Arctic horny whelmer, a hardy animal native to the planet Rothana. Like a 6-legged armadillo with 2 separate armored sections and a tough cartilage part in the middle, they had based other vehicles on this in the past, like a very successful old patrol vehicle they made for a mining company, and so the AT-AT's design is able to navigate terrain so well because its proportions and body were shaped on a creature that could scale the icy and rocky mountainous terrain, which is why there is this flexible concertina section at the middle of the Walker. At a height of 5.7 meters, a length of 13.2 meters, and 5.32 meters across, it was about 1/4 the height of the AT-AT, 3 Jawas longer than an AAT, and wider than the fattest Hutts. With its top speed of 60 kilometers per hour or 37 miles per hour, it was stomping along just faster than its hovering Seppi rival, but the TX-130 was 5 times as fast. Though the whole point of not using repulsor generators like most craft, and being a mechanically powered walker, it could walk through enemy shields, something impossible for craft utilizing electrogravitic fields to float. The AT-AT was also impervious to normal ion attacks due to a robust electromagnetic shielding layered into the armor, and that it was grounded through the feet. Some other important stats before we head under the armor plating is that it had a 40-ton cargo capacity, fuel for 500 kilometers or 310 miles, rations and air supply for 3 weeks, which meant that it could act as a mobile space fort dropped down on asteroids, moons, or harsh planets. Let's start by looking at the feet, or foot pads. They were packed full of terrain sensors and tractor field generators, a tech usually seen in Star Destroyers in the form of a tractor beam projector used to capture smaller ships. But they scaled this tech down to fit into the footpad so that each step had the effect of bonding to the surface. This is why it can scale 90-degree sheer cliff walls, and this ability was designed to be able to walk up fortress walls. And it's crazy that we don't have an example of this, but it's said it was designed to also provide a unique angle of attack, climbing into massive cave systems or underworlds of ecumenopolises like Coruscant, so that they could hang upside down from the ceiling like a spider and rain down fire from above. Or as Skywalker showed, it could easily climb over enemy capital ships just using a magnetic feature, which was also put into these feet. So you see, Rothana took that directive literally. This thing could go anywhere, being completely sealed off with a pressurized interior, that 3-week supply of oxygen, which even if you were in a Type 1 atmosphere, it would still help with everything from dust, smoke, fire, and of course be necessary in outer space, when underwater, or in toxic atmospheres. And later in the war against bioweapon attacks, which the CIS did deploy a few times. It required 7 specially trained crew members, like pilots and CCs or clone commanders. These specialized tanker clones were trained for this role since birth. The pilot worked the 6 legs, while the spotter sat above him and worked the sensor suite station to scan through different data displays providing intel on friendly and enemy activity, atmospheric conditions, and different wavelengths of light. The spotter would then relay the info to the 4 gunners tucked in each corner, with the front 2 working the pair of anti-personnel laser cannons, while the ones towards the rear worked a single cannon, making for 6 in total. The final crew member had the best job but the lowest lifespan, sitting exposed behind the controls of the mass driver cannon up top. He got here via this simple ladder, opening this hatch and slipping in. While there was an effort to provide some armor protection, being enveloped on the sides, back, and even this headrest wrapping around to try and save his head, he would still be exposed to shrapnel and explosives that might not punch through the armor plating, but would easily blow through his plastoid body armor. Each of these sections would hold 10 troops, for 20 total, with their blasters standing up on these racks located here. Under the floor is where you find the ammo storage for the main cannon, which the troops had to manually reload onto this ammunition belt to be fed into the cannon. These could be any combination of munitions, from burrowing bunker busters, heat-seeking projectiles, sonic charges, or your standard high-explosive shells. And what would become very common was a sort of plasma bolt generating round that made it work like a standard laser cannon. A shell that helps to think of it more like a magazine, being packed full of a certain number of shots that are activated with each trigger pull, and then ejected when you went through all these shots. This combo allowed it to work like a mobile artillery vehicle, and the targeting system was accurate enough to calculate for these different rounds, and even shoot down slow-moving aircraft or intercept incoming rocket fire. A really unique design feature are the acceleration compensators packed into each of the troop sections. Usually only seen in starfighters, this tech was another form of gravity manipulation like seen in the feet, but in this case it's for reducing the G-forces felt by the troops. This is required in starfighters and capital ships, which could kill a person with their acceleration, the person normally surviving about 5 Gs, while the Executor class had a top acceleration of 1000 Gs. The compensators in the Walker were likely far less powerful than on a capital ship, but worked as a way of reducing recoil when hit by a massive round, or when falling off a surface and smashing into the ground. It's not the role this tech was invented for, but it had the effect of preventing a deadly whipping of the neck or flying out of your seat and being crushed to death by the reduction of that felt acceleration. The canopy cockpit up front opens via this hinge, and the way you get up is that this bar would pivot down to act like a stepladder. These notches are for holding clamps inside of the capital ship hangar. You can see the actuator pistons here. There are 4 exits, 2 at the front and 2 at the rear, for the troops to spill out and not just have one ramp for the enemy to focus all their fire on. And if we look close, we can see the life support air reprocessor here. We also get the comment that clones complain that they did not have specialized armor that was more streamlined and smaller for operating in these tight positions. You'd imagine they were taking that helmet off as soon as they were away from a stuck-up clone commander, but the whole suit was said to be cumbersome and just felt silly to wear your little blaster-proof armor while within one of the best armored vehicles in the galaxy. There were variants with a main loading ramp that could move supplies, AT-ATs, or speeders, and some were built out to act as a mobile command center, establishing a network with that synergistic trio, the acclimator being the HQ for the Republic forces, talking to the forward command dropped off via LAATC, which in turn coordinated with the mobile command centers inside of various walkers during a large-scale offensive. This trio of Rthana craft were some of the first ships and vehicles ready for use, and they made sure that every iteration from prototypes to the final product were being shipped to Kamino to use in their sprawling training centers, which utilized everything from adjustable terrain features, holographic projectors, droid enemies, and weather simulators to prep the clones for any planet in the galaxy. These were large enough to accommodate battalions and multiple armored units, working in conjunction with the UT-AT, SPHA, Juggernaut, and various speeders. When the clones say, "Just like the simulation," sometimes they mean the video game style, but also these massive multi-day war games. In 22 BBY, Grandmaster Yoda arrived on Kamino and ordered the immediate scrambling of a sizable portion of the army that he had only learned about a few days earlier. And though it was their first time seeing real combat, all the pieces were moving with deadly efficiency. Most of the droid units seen during the Battle of Geonosis were completely legal. In fact, they had been used to enforce trade deals, protect Trade Federation assets, or by the Mune bankers in seizing property from someone that fell back on their payments, or just taxes. And with all that experience killing poor people and pirates, the banking clan's Hailfire droid was a seasoned vet, and knew how to exploit a weak spot. One of the simplest and effective vehicles in the galaxy, it just connected 30 powerful rockets to a droid brain solely dedicated to seek and destroy, drop it on fast all-terrain wheels, and we see that the first AT-AT tank commanders were meeting a shockingly fast and fiery end, with rockets blowing through the legs with so much power that the tanker's underside slammed into the rocky ground, igniting the fuel reserves that line this bottom layer. Everything from the fuel for the engines and all that fancy gravitation tech, not to mention the Tabana gas used to power those 6 anti-personnel cannons, was all stored in this belly, and then chain reaction explosions would set off the mass driver shells, which were packed under the floorboards. Others showed off that droid brain by having the rockets rain down and hit it on its weakest part, the flexible connecting middle, or punching right through the ball turret to successfully exploit the line of Tabana gas and energizers that would be in this weapon. Of course, every walker that landed a hit on them was an instant kill, but the slower rate of fire had it looking like the tank battalion would be overwhelmed, until the gunship swooped in and took advantage of the droid's lack of shielding or armor, easily slicing through to cut off the advance. Once the walkers were in position, that terrain was solidly in Republic hands. Coordinating with the Acclimator and those forward stations, they were able to count the first Battle of the Clone Wars as a decisive Republic victory. A celebration of the saviors of the Republic was held in the form of a military parade on Coruscant, a show of strength for both Republic citizens and a threat to shakily allied senators, while only the most attuned masters could sense that this could also be a threat to democracy and the Jedi Order. When Palpatine first laid eyes on this army, of the AT-AT walkers specifically, he said, quote, "These weapons of war would be awe-inspiring if they were not so terrifying." Almost immediately after this, these walkers would be crucial in the defense of Christophsis, though again we see that many were lost. As this battle drew on, the clone Slick would reveal that he had joined forces against his brothers, convinced by Asajj Ventress that the clones were nothing more than slaves fighting for corrupt Coruscanti elites. When he was cornered by Rex and Cody, he fled through the ammo depot, and was able to detonate explosives set on several walkers and gunships. On a battlefront where even the slightest advantage could decide the victor, the next days would see even more walkers lost, though clever thinking by the Jedi would force the Separatists surrender, and they were quickly reinforced by more troops and armored units. The assault on Athe would be one of the most stunning uses of these walkers, with the monastery being in a perfect defensive position, anti-aircraft batteries crowning the top of an enormous plateau, so the Republic had to rely on the gravity-locking footpads to make the long 90-degree ascent, with Ahsoka Tano using her saber to keep the pilots safe from incoming fire, and making it to the top just in time to save her brazen master. But they needed to immediately switch to defense. After just destroying all the anti-aircraft weaponry to take the monastery, now the Seppies were descending with multiple C-9979 landing craft, intent on making this ancient holy site their grave. As the B-1s and Spiders start to make it into the main courtyard, we see the mass driver cannon firing rapidly like a laser cannon. Not as powerful as shells, but this higher rate was why that variable munition option was so great. And we see that while the front canopy windows are immune to small arms fire, the heavy blaster cannon of the Dwarf Spider explodes through and kills these 2 clones. After faking a surrender to buy them some time and drop the droid's defenses, Rex and his boys are able to hold them off by hiding beneath this downed behemoth, until Cody's forces are able to come to their rescue. Sometime after this, droid units started calling these 6 legs and 6s. It might not be 8-legged, but instead of dreaming of electric sheep, these B-1s were having nightmares of 6-leggers as horror stories were shared between battalions, which is a really interesting insight into the droids' minds, in that even though they weren't organics, there was still some element of psychological warfare. The next major use was during the Battle of Ryloth, where we again see some very smart tactics from the Separatists. Mace Windu and the 91st Mobile Recon Corps were leading an armor division through a narrow canyon pass on their way to liberate the capital city of Lesu. AATs waited to open fire until all the walkers were far along the path, and then took down the lead walker, bringing them to a halt, and then worked to close the rear.
Now order our cannon to target their rear units. We'll box them in and blast them to pieces.
Mace ordered his recon troops to deploy the AT-RTs, then used his powers in the Force to break the canopy glass and free the unconscious pilot. Was probably very glad he was wearing his full armor that day, before calling deep on the Force to push the massive walker out of the path and free up the rest of his units. Expert use of frog walkers outmaneuvered the AATs and cleared the way for the tanks to push towards the capital city, where Wat Tambor and his tactical droid were examining the weaknesses of this infamous Sixer that would soon be shelling their defenses. With the help of local resistance fighter Cham Syndulla, the 91st boys approached the city to make sure it was free of droids and provide rations for the Twi'leks, only to witness the latest of CIS war crimes, as hyenas slaughtered the civilians before they could even think of joining Syndulla's resistance. By now, stories had spread of AT-AT battalions leveling whole mountains to get to the target, so the T-Series calculated that their best option was to use the captive Twi'leks as living shields, putting their encampments all around the walls. The combined 91st and local forces launched their attacks as MTTs were returning to the capital, hoping to cross the energy bridge in time, only for the droids to show how willing they were to sacrifice each other.
Oh well, too bad for them.
But the 2 troops and Mace were able to reactivate the bridge, and the RTs and Blurgs storm over and fight their way into the city. with Mace taking Wat Tambor hostage. And when the walkers were finally within the walls, all could celebrate this hard-fought win, with the AT-ATs playing a part in the victory parade. Though we do not see this, there are several reports of how this walker was susceptible to mines. He got 6 legs to step on a mine, each walking pretty close to the other, and it wasn't that far off the ground, so worse than losing the foot, the mines usually penetrated that belly full of fuel, with similar effects to what we saw with the Hailfire missiles. The AT-HE was an evolutionary link between the Republic and Imperial walkers, having longer legs than the TE, but not as long as the AT-AT. For whatever reason, there are no images of this vehicle, but I believe this has to do with the fact that Kuat and Rathona had some insider intel. A certain embodiment of the dark side may have told them to focus on building a towering fortress and to not worry about the next iteration of wartime tank, because it is said that they began work on the AT-AT before the AT-HE was even finished. After Cad Bane captured the holocron and Kyber crystal required to locate all known Force-sensitive children, Anakin would deploy these walkers in another novel way.
You are not thinking of using those to transport the clones to that frigate.
Well, they are pressurized.
And they're equipped with magnetic feet. Good call.
As the walkers were released, they gently floated down to make contact, and we see that they are using the rapid-fire laser charges during this rescue mission of Master Opal, not wanting to blow up the ship with explosive shells. These walkers would go down with the enemy ship, but the mission was mostly a success. Ki-Adi-Mundi and Kenobi would lead one of the largest offensives of the entire war, during the Second Battle of Geonosis.
Once we have landed, we shall knock out the shield generator. That is our primary target.
Y-Wing bombers would first try to take out the gun emplacements near the LZ, but Geonosian cannons were still operational and firing away on the LAATs racing through the flak, along with growing numbers of Nantek starfighters.
Get the tanks on the ground, now!
Mundi's forces were shot down short of the LZ, and Kenobi's were shot down as well, but crash-landed a bit closer, while Skywalker was in position but lost all of his AT-ATs.
Skywalker's tanks are gone, and they're trying to contact General Kenobi's forces for support.
Falling back on one of the oldest and most successful tactics, they circled the wagons, or walkers and gunships, to create an impromptu armored base to try and hold off the bugs swarming with sonic blasters, speeders, and AATs, while also trying to coordinate with Yularen and Atmosphere to locate the downed generals. As the clones fought through the chaos, they find the only survivor of this 212th group were Kenobi and a single clone. Mundi used his saber to cut through some of the anti-tank barricades and made it near Skywalker's position, as the lead Venator was now being strafed by the Nantex fighters. Skywalker was able to bring down that defensive wall blocking their path to the shield generator, and the flame troopers were clearing out the tunnels. From this vantage point, Kai could see that the LZ was about to be overwhelmed, and is able to call in air support just in time.
The reinforcements have arrived!
By now, most of the walkers had been disabled, but Kenobi believed there was still enough to pull off the victory.
You'll be able to temporarily jam their scanners so they are unable to target the incoming tanks. Once the tanks knock out the shield, Master Mundi can bring the rest of the troops in with the gunships.
This is one of the best examples of that genius decision by Rathona to make a tank without repulsor tech. The AT-ATs were able to walk through the shields and open fire on the generator with their high explosive shells, and the gunships perfectly coordinated to swoop in just as the protective plasma layer fell apart. The next target was the main droid and weapons factory. Luminara and Dooley's forces were coming in with fresh gunships, tanks, and hundreds of troops. As they pushed through, it was looking like an easy victory, but the first bad sign was the ambush launch from the tall, rocky spires. And while the tanks were encircling the fortress and defending the clones from enemy infantry, for the role of actually punching through the thick fortress walls, that task went to a row of AV-7 cannons. But then a new model of Bactoid tank emerged through the thick plate doors. The simply named Super Tank would unleash a barrage of mortar fire that was unrelenting for several minutes, easily destroying the unarmored cannons, and just through accuracy by volume, were able to land devastating hits on the weak spots of the AT-ATs. While the armor of the Super Tank was impenetrable to even the mass driver cannon, having no weak spots on any forward-facing section, perhaps only near the launchers themselves, which is why we see it has an armored hood that only peels back when firing. Ahsoka and Barriss Offee used this weapon to hit the main generator and bring down the entire factory, surviving by being inside of this indestructible new tank. In Felucia, we got to see the walker being used in the role of long-range artillery, and quickly switching into an armored troop carrier role to take a CIS fortress. And after years as a beloved workhorse of the Jedi Generals, its most famous use would be to try and kill Kenobi, when Cody executed Order 66 and immediately moved to kill the traitorous general. Though it wasn't a high explosive shell, it also wasn't one of those smaller anti-personnel laser firing shells either. This equivalent of a heavy laser cannon bolt may have been subtly guided by the Force, as Obi-Wan would just barely make it out alive. As soon as the Republic became the Empire, these walkers near instantly went from a symbol of proud fighters of democracy to symbols of oppression. Walkers all across the galaxy were moved to protect political centers, and used as an implied threat of force against the citizens. And when they deemed that the protest became a riot, those 6 anti-personnel cannons would open fire. Or like we see on Raxus Secundus, the Coruscant of the CIS had millions of citizens that were not instantly kneeling to their new emperor, including their leader.
I can no longer condone this unjust occupation.
As the people started to resist the clones, the AT-AT stepped in to help squash any thoughts of rebellion, and noticed that all the Republic coloring is grayed out, both on the troopers and the vehicles. When Bad Batch rescued Senator Avi Singh, they had to get past Walker patrols, and as they escaped, they commandeer one, exploiting their intimate knowledge of this vehicle to take out the entire crew, Wrecker chucking them out of the forward side hatch. The Imperial clone gunners were able to load a heavy plasma charge and angle the gun to sink a shot that disabled the rear legs, forcing Bad Batch to jack another one, only for a third walker to land a second shot. With Tech's repairs, they are able to get the damaged walker operational, spewing thick black smoke and leaking oil as it dragged itself to a spot designated by the Senator. When the enemy walker caught up, a shot to the midsection scrapped it, but using the wreckage and a thermal charge, they were able to collapse their escape tunnel entrance and lose the Imperial clones. Some Imperial variants would open up the sides of the rear section, keeping a protective front, but then allowing the troops to open fire from this raised platform as they moved into the rebellious populations. While this made it able to engage threats on the side, of course this opened it up to grenades, while others had a flat top for moving large amounts of cargo. Over the following months, these engineering marvels were being scrapped, along with all the other remnants of the Clone Wars on the junk world Braca, sharing a mass grave with their enemy, as everything from Venators to Lucra Hulks ended up here. 15 years later, by 4 BBY, Ahsoka wanted the Spectres to reach out to old allies hiding out on the planet Selos, and Kanan, an Order 66 survivor, is teleported back to his youth when he sees the allies' mobile home.
Now that is a work of art.
Looks like an old Republic tank, used during the Clone Wars.
When they approach, the man who saw clones kill his master is quick to ignite his blade, triggering Wolf to take some shots, but Rex gets Wolf and Gregor to calm down, while Ezra reminds Kanan that Ahsoka told them to trust these allies. When they get inside, we see that it looks like a mobile command variant of Walker, or perhaps a variant that had the top flattened for cargo, with the clones adding parts back like the main gun and other repairs. There are tons of accents to make it feel like home, from wind chimes to lights, and practical mods to make it a multi-story home with balcony handrails to dry your clothes and towels, and a flat seating area that doubles as a landing pad. Here the walker was used to hunt the massive Jupas, and either just due to age or the mods, it is pumping out black smoke with each shaky step. It looks like some legs were replaced, and the front step-down ladder on the canopy now works as a lookout spot for the hunts. They connect Zeb to an energy line that acts as a harpoon, and with some teamwork they do bring in the beast. But before the Spectres can leave with Rex's coordinates for potential rebel bases, the betrayal by Wolf brought the imps to this remote world. Wolf didn't want his brothers dragged into the rebel conspiracy, and got ahead of any accusations by contacting the nearest officials. Though he apologized and regretted it, the Empire was already on the way. The first TIE got shot down by a rocket launcher, and in the lull before the next wave, Rex gives the new generation a lesson on the mass driver cannon.
The Traverse controls are over here on the left, and the elevations on the right.
But it isn't long before they spot a trio of AATs closing in on them. Facing off against their Imperial replacements, Rex has to admit he is impressed with this new behemoth.
Reinforced armor plating, heavy cannons, and anti-personnel blasters.
Turning to race into the sandstorm, they are able to take advantage of the Jedi's powers to sense the enemy when all other sensor systems were down. By trusting the Force, Ezra puts a perfect shot into the AAT's weakness, the flexible neck. When they emerge from the sandstorm, the clones help the Spectres get off in their ship, but they know that the old heroes have no chance against the two walkers. While the clones were deciding to go out in a bang, full steam ahead, eating powerful bolts that drop it, only to rise up again, spewing smoke and slamming into the legs of the Goliath, while trying to fire at the second. But as you can see, the energy shots are harmlessly dispersing across the surface. And as the AT-AT seems immovable, the mass driver cannon loses power. Rex screams at the imps to come out and fight him, before accepting that he will be disintegrated by these turrets. He closes his eyes as the Spectres return to blast into the enemy, dropping down to hijack one and use it to open fire on the other, providing a shocking defeat for the Imperial forces that would lead to Vader's Inquisitors getting personally involved. In the views of some military strategists, the AT-AT overcorrected for the worry of mines. It wasn't as stable, but did hit the main objective of everything Imperial at this time. It struck fear into the population. You drop one of these down and it acted like an instant castle, towering over a city and able to rain death from above like some angry god. As the Rebel Alliance was formally organized, and the Galactic Civil War was raging on, this discarded masterpiece was being rebuilt by mechanics all across the stars, and pressed into the fight to restore the Republic. At least one fell into the hands of a Weequay gang, who placed it at the Sreeler spaceport to extort payments from visiting spacers, which resulted in it having its back legs blown off thanks to a concussion missile fired by Chewbacca. Months after the Battle of Endor, in 5 ABY, the New Republic was pitted against these during the Battle of Kuat Drive Yards. Perhaps the most logistically important battle of the entire war, the Imperial Remnant threw everything they had into the defense of the largest supplier of Republic and Imperial ships and vehicles. In the shipyards that made up the massive orbital ring, AT-ATs and AT-TEs crawled along the surface to try and shoot down NR forces. Though this final battle with the Walker was a loss, it would be forever loved and respected by factions all across the galaxy. That's it for the breakdown, and as for behind the scenes facts, one of the longest running standoffs on vehicle lore concerns that mass driver Kanan. A lot of the early cross-section books were just worked on from images of ships and vehicles, without actually seeing them in action, and a lot of what happens on screen was for plot and cool special effect purposes, and the lore comes second. Movies and later shows were king, and though the Walker always looks like it's just firing a laser cannon, the whole idea of it being a mass driver firing a physical shell has never faded away. It was re-established in every Legends and even now the new canon books, though it's finally addressed on why it looks like a laser by vaguely saying that it could load shells that fired plasma bolts, which is what I meant by saying it kinda works like a magazine. Many of the same stop-motion animators for the AT-ATs in Empire Strike Back were brought in to work with the CGI team in Attack of the Clones, to try and capture the same feel of the movement. But there was also a deliberate choice to make them not seem invincible. Like each side of the Clone Wars was devastatingly powerful, and it would not just be an easy win for the good guys, which is why we see them blown up so quickly upon their first deployment on Geonosis. In the Battlefront games, they act as mobile spawn points, and in Battlegrounds they can be built in mech factories. All the technical info comes from the Attack of the Clones visual dictionary, complete cross-sections, Imperial Handbook, Encyclopedia of Starfighters and Other Vehicles, and Rise of the Separatists. Please hit that like button, leave a comment, or share the video. These are the best ways to help me out. Subscribe to see more videos like this, check out the membership, or one of these videos that I'm sure you're gonna love. But most important of all, remember, no armor can stop plot-based projectiles, and the Force will be with you, always.